Hey there, my name's Liv. Welcome back to my channel. And this week I'm going to be showing you all of the basics you need to know when learning how to crochet. And in doing that, we're going to make this silent princess flower from The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. The first thing you're going to need is yarn. So we need medium weight level 4 yarn in white, blue, yellow, green, and brown. We will also need a 4mm and a 3mm crochet hook. So whenever starting off with crochet, we do a slip knot just like with knitting. Slip knots are done the exact same way. You fold a loop onto itself and pull the extra yarn through that hole. Whenever you're knitting, you have a bunch of stitches on the needle, but with crochet, you only ever have one stitch. So there are many different ways to hold your yarn and your hook when you're crocheting. Generally, the thing that I like to do is I wrap the long tail of the yarn around my index finger and I hold the actual work with my middle and thumb fingers like this. This way the yarn stays fairly tight so it's easy for me to hook it whenever I'm making more stitches. A lot of crochet patterns will start with similar instructions. Either you will chain a bunch of stitches together or make something called a magic circle. This here is me chaining, so I'm basically wrapping the yarn around the hook and pulling it through the loop that I have on the hook, something called a slip stitch, and it creates this braid in the yarn. So this is the basis for our project. For the petals, we're working in length, sort of like with regular knitting. We're working in a line or in rows. So with this project and all of my fiber arts projects, this is not my pattern, so I'm not going to be showing you every single step on how to make it. If you would like to make this flower, I have the link to the pattern in the description. I think it costs around 7 or 8 Canadian dollars for me to purchase it. So if you're interested in making it, this video can be helpful and give you little tips on the challenging parts without actually giving the whole pattern away. The first part of this pattern is very challenging. I find anytime you have to crochet into a chain like this when starting any sort of row style project, I find it very hard personally. So I skipped over the first little bit. Now I'm going to get into showing you the very basic stitches that you're going to be needing whenever you're learning how to crochet. So unlike with knitting, you only ever have one stitch on your hook. You actually have to find the stitches that you're going to be working into in your work. So it can be a little challenging to find them at first. What you're going to look for is this long strip of what looks like braided yarn, these little V's of yarn. So whenever you put your hook through one of these little V's, you've got 2 strings on your crochet hook. With this part of the pattern, however, I'm actually crocheting into the back or the underside of the stitches, so I'm only going to be having 1 string on my hook. So the first stitch type I'm going to show you how to make is called a single crochet. First thing we're going to do is insert our hook into one of the stitches on the work, the stitch that's closest to the one that is attached to your hook already. Then we're going to do something called yarn over, where we hook the yarn onto the hook and pull it through the stitch of our project. We now have 2 stitches on our crochet hook. Then we're going to yarn over again, pick up some extra yarn and pull it through the 2 stitches that we had on our hook. Now we have returned back to 1 stitch on the hook and we have 1 new single crochet added to our project. Since I'm working these stitches into the wrong side of the initial chain, it's really hard to get them onto the hook. So if you struggle a little bit with this part, just keep trying. The next type of stitch I'm going to be showing you how to make is called the half double crochet. It's basically an in-between measurement of the single crochet and the double crochet. I'll get more into crochet stitch measurements in a second. So for this one, we started off the same way that you would start off a double crochet. We're actually going to wrap a little bit of yarn around the hook before inserting it into the stitch of our project. I like to hold this extra yarn with my index finger. We're going to insert the hook into the stitch, yarn over to the working yarn, and then pull through. You should now have 3 stitches on your crochet hook. Now for the half double crochet, we're going to yarn over and pull that loop through all 3 stitches on the hook. The double crochet is very similar. we're still going to have that wrapped yarn at the beginning before we insert the hook into the first stitch of our project. The only real difference is at the end, whenever we have the 3 stitches on our hook. Instead of yarning over and pulling through all 3 stitches, we're going to yarn over, pull through the first 2 stitches, which is basically a single crochet. We have 2 stitches on our hook, then we're going to yarn over again and pull through the last 2 stitches. So literally a double crochet is just 2 single crochets that are chained together. So basically the difference between all of these stitch types is it changes how long the stitch is, how much it expands out from the project. So you can look here and see how the single crochet is much smaller to the half double, and then the double is even larger. For all of these, I'm using the US terms because there is UK terms which are different. A lot of the names are changed completely or they're swapped for other names. A single crochet for UK is a double crochet, like the name is just different. So that's something that you want to keep in mind whenever you're looking at any sort of patterns, and make sure that you check what type of lingo they're using. So here I have my first petal of the flower done, and now I'm just weaving in my ends. This is a lot easier to do than with knitting, because with knitting you really have to pay attention to the way that the stitches are connected together. But with crocheting, everything looks a little messier to begin with, so I just try to find whichever stitches I can, shove my needle through there, and then pull the string through, and it's hidden away, never to be seen again. So the pattern doesn't call for this, but I wanted my petals to have a lot of structure to them and be formable. So I decided to put some wire through the edges of the petals. I attached it to a tapestry needle and sort of wound it through the stitches like this. And I wanted the very point to stay covered, so I added a little bit of white glue just to keep it in place so I could pose the petals any which way I would like. Now I'm going to be doing the blue inside part of the petals. They're basically just a smaller version of the white ones, very similar. I start off with a chain at the beginning, and then we're going to be doing stitches into the chain. And for this one, it was all single crochet stitches. And this is what it looked like at the end. So the next part we're going to be doing are the little yellow stems that come out of the flower. You'll need your 3mm hook for this and some embroidery thread. We're not actually going to be crocheting for this. We need to make a slip knot that is very long, and holding the hook like this, we're going to be wrapping the working yarn around the stitch. This was very challenging for me. It took a couple tries for me to get it initially. The instructions were fairly helpful, but it's just a challenging move to do, so it might take a bit of practice. For this one, I was really struggling to pull the last loop through all of my little twisty loops I had made, so the struggle was real here, and I made the first slip stitch a little too loose. You can kind of see it's really far off here, so I basically did some finagling to get it to look the way that's supposed to look. If you've ever made a pom-pom before, this is basically a pom-pom before it gets cut up at the ends to make it puffy. I would recommend just practicing, trying, and don't be upset whenever it looks like really gross garbage and you have to restart, because I had to try it quite a few times until I got something even slightly presentable. This is what it ended up looking like. Good enough, that's all I have to say. You need to make 3 of these, and then we have to take some more wire. You're supposed to put it through very specific holes, but I could not find them, so I just shoved the wire wherever I could into the little yellow stemma pollen thingy, and we have to wrap the longer tail around the wire for a good 6 centimeters till we have a nice little stem like this, and we take all 3, wrap the 3 together. So at the beginning of this video, I mentioned 2 different ways you can start a project. I'm now going to be showing you the second way, which is called a magic circle. So first thing we're going to do is hold the short tail on our pinky like this and take the long tail and wrap it around 3 of our fingers so we have an X. Then we're going to insert our crochet hook underneath the first string, grab the second string and twist it around like this. Then we're going to hook the top left arm of the X with our hook and pull it through this loop. You should now have a loop on your crochet hook, as well as a very, very large loop that was wrapped around your fingers that we're now going to hold like this between your thumb and your middle finger. Then we're going to insert our hook into the very large loop, hook the yarn going around the 2 strands of the large loop. We want to make sure that the 2 strands of the large loop are on the left-hand side. We are now going to treat this like a single crochet by yarning over and pulling through the last 2 stitches. We now have 1 stitch as part of the magic circle. Usually patterns will specify how many stitches you have to do. So we're going to continue inserting our hook into the large loop, going around the 2 strands of string to yarn over, pull through, and then yarn over and pull through those 2 stitches again to create another stitch in the magic circle. This is another thing that a lot of beginner crocheters have a lot of difficulty with, so just keep practicing and don't be upset if you have to undo your work to start over. Whenever we have the number of stitches we're looking for, we'll have this nice braid along the side, and then we pull the short tail of the string and it's going to actually tighten all of the stitches together into a circle. We know we've done it correctly whenever we have what I like to call the tire effect, where the braids are basically the tire tracks. Almost looks like a little rolled up caterpillar. So whenever we're adding more stitches, we're going to be working around the sides of the work, going into those 2 stitches on the side, the little V, and we're going to do our single crochets into these stitches, working around, slowly expanding the circle outwards and making it bigger. I like to use stitch markers whenever I'm working in the round like this. I find it can be challenging if you're all working in one color to see where you begin and where you end. So stitch markers can be very helpful. So the next type of stitch I'm going to show you how to do is called a decrease. So we're going to insert our hook into the first stitch on the row and yarn over, pull through a loop. So we've got 2 loops on our hook. Then we're going to, instead of yarning over and pulling through those 2 stitches, we're going to insert into the next stitch, again, yarn over and pull through, so we have 3 stitches on our hook. Now we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 stitches. This basically decreases the total amount of stitches we have in that round by 1. This is what the bulb looks like whenever it's all done before it gets stuffed, and this is what the flowers look like with all of the little blue parts and what they look like after I sewed them all together. I just sewed all the sides together. So the next thing I have to make is the stem. This is basically just a big green tube. And the one piece of advice I would give for the stem is it can get a little challenging to find where the stitches are. So one thing that I started to do is, instead of looking for the V's, I started looking for these dark holes, because that is where my hook needs to go through. So I would just look for those and insert them into those spots. Made it a lot easier after I discovered that's how you can find the stitches instead of looking for the V's. Because whenever you're making the tube, it's really hard to see, especially whenever it's so few stitches in circumference. Now I'm getting to the bottom of the stem where it starts to expand a little bit, kind of looks like a shower head, and it has these star-shaped sort of viney tentacles that come off the sides. This was also very challenging because it involved a long chain that I then had to single crochet into. This is what the stem looks like whenever it's all finished. So the next thing I have to do is start assembling the flower. So I'm going to put the yellow pollen stem into the main part of the flower and then insert the wire into the rest of the stem. After that, I have to sew the petals of the stem onto the petals of the flower, and I have to make sure that the stem petals go in between the flower petals like this. This is what it looks like afterwards. And now I'm going to start sewing the front part of the flower. So I'm going to take the blue color, and this is something you have to just see and feel out how it's supposed to go together. Basically, we want the blue to go all the way to the center around the yellow stems. So I basically just did what felt right, and this is what I ended up with. Next thing we do is the bulb, so I'm going to insert some wire into the white bulb and attach it to my little green stem that I made. Very similar to the main flower stem, it's basically just smaller. Then it's just a matter of sewing the green leaves onto the white bulb. A lot of sewing is part of the assembly for this project. After that, I need to add this tiny stem onto the main stem. So I'm going to find an opening somewhere and shove the wire into any hole that I can, work it down to the bottom, and then sew that part on there too. You can really choose wherever you want the bulb to be, but I wanted it to be at the back and maybe an inch from the base of the main flower. After this, I have to make the little petals that go around the stem. This is what they look like, and I just sew them on. There's a lot of freedom of choice where you want to place these. Next thing we're going to do is the dirt for the pot. So I don't want it to fill up the pot all the way, just about this much. And I'm going to be using a tan color for this. You should be going in with brown, but I, at the time, was very low on brown and I needed it for other projects, so I went with this tan color that nobody's ever really going to see because it's going to be hidden inside the pot. So for my pot, it was very large and I had to completely DIY this. I had to measure the inside of the pot and then keep measuring the bottom part of the dirt until it was the perfect fit for the bottom of my specific pot. Then whenever I started working up the sides, I had to keep in mind this lip here. So I worked up to the lip and then I had to increase the circumference a little bit just to have it fit properly inside the pot, accounting for this lip. This is what it looks like with the lip created, fits nice and snug inside my pot. So I continue going up the side with the tan color until I get maybe a centimeter from the top of the dirt where I switch to the brown. So I go up to about here. So this is the brown I'm going to be using, and I continued on whenever I got to the top and I started to close up the dirt pocket. Whenever we get to the stuffing portion, I did have a lot of extra yarn just hanging around from projects that I had recently taken apart. So I like to use that as stuffing just to reduce the waste that I'm producing by using extra stuffing whenever I've got all of this free stuffing right here. After that, it's just a matter of crocheting close the top part of the dirt and inserting the flower into the hole. I wanted to make sure that the wire part of the stem went through to the other side for some added stability. And you are supposed to glue the dirt into the bottom of the pot, but I just didn't feel it was necessary. So now I think the only thing left is to see what it looks like. Where are the glamour shots? Thank you for watching the whole video. I hope that you found something helpful and maybe you learned how to crochet. One thing that I will say for anybody who is learning how to crochet, just practice and don't be upset whenever you have to take your work apart. Sometimes that happens. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has those days. Anyways, see you next time. Bye!